do want to thank you guys for coming on. I really appreciate it. This is such an important topic. So landlords, who are obviously have been known to, since landlords began, they've been harassing tenants and making their right to housing contingent on being able to meet like these exorbitant, like constantly rising prices. That has not changed because of the pandemic. People haven't just come to their senses and been nice to their their renters. How shocking. Anyway, our next guests, Nova Lucero and Juan Nunez, are tenant organizers with the Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition, and they're here to talk about the behavior they've seen from landlords and how vulnerable tenants can come together to protect their rights and their homes. Thank you so much for joining us. Did I get your names right?
I'm Nova Lucero. But
Nova Lucero. Okay. Thank you very much. No and problem. Juan, did I get you correct?
Got it right. Juan Nunez.
Okay. Thank you so much. So can you talk about, what is going on with landlords and tenants in the Bronx right now?
Juan, you can go first.
Well, in my building, I'm the president of my tenant association right now. And at the moment, even before the pandemic started, we were, fighting with the landlord regarding like random rent fees. We got hit with an MCI rent increase a few years ago, and an MCI rent increase is a major capital improvement. That's when a landlord, if he does some renovations on the building, he could pass on the cost to the tenants permanently forever.
Wow.
And of course,
meaning he can raise your rent permanently forever because he painted the stairwell once.
Right. Or in our cases, he renovated the bathrooms and kitchens, but he knows that he used that as a tool just to raise the rent. So he did shoddy work in the kitchens and the bathrooms, made them smaller. We're still dealing with like some of the work that they did still need repairs, and yet we still got hit with that rent increase, which is like $57 per room.
Wow. And that was before the pandemic. What's been happening since the pandemic? I'm assuming they're not easing up.
Well, no. Our landlord is known for adding. He started charging people random late fees on their rents.
Who is it? Let's name him. Let's name him by name and shame the shit out of him.
Steve Finkelstein. He's the landlord.
Okay.
Yeah, he's one of the worst evictors in the Bronx. And what he started doing after the pandemic is that the super posted a letter on WhatsApp, reminding people that rent is due, like giving people like a link to where they can pay the rent. And then they posted that all over the building. Just like he gave us like a list of places that we could look for, like how to deal with the COVID-19 crisis, but very subtly in the bottom, he put the link to the rent. Remember,
he's like, "Oh, I hope you guys are good. Don't forget rent is due. We're not."
Yeah.
Yeah, just in case you thought there might be a question as to whether. Now, what's happening with the tenants in the building? Are they? Do you have a number of people who've lost jobs or are struggling to pay the rent? What's happening there?
The majority of the tenants are struggling right now. Many of the tenants are immigrants. Who are not going to get any money from the stimulus package. A lot of them, a few tenants are cab drivers that aren't driving right now because they're afraid that they'll get sick. So a lot of tenants are home attendants too. And those jobs, they can't really go visit and take care of the elderly because you're not supposed to be that close right now during the pandemic. So a lot of people are struggling. A lot of people don't know whether they can make rent next month. Many tenants weren't able to pay April's rent. Because they're not working at all. And a lot of tenants were already in housing court dealing with rent issues with the landlord. So,
Nova, you were in a different building or the same?
So I organize, so I support tenants across the Northwest Bronx in organizing tenants associations and fighting against bad practices. So I'm supporting Juan and his TA, but I work in other buildings as well.
And are you seeing the same sorts of things happening across the board in other buildings? Juan just is lucky to live in the one with the worst guy ever.
Yeah, he's lucky. Stephen Finkelstein is pretty notorious for coming up with many clever ways to like increase the rents and confuse people. So I would say that's a little different than what I'm seeing in other buildings. In some of the other buildings, like for example, there's like individual, like there's problems that are unique to that landlord. So often what they'll do is they'll just like kind of, what we're seeing in some of them will just leave. They're not like sending the super to clean, like regular maintenance is kind of like out the window. We're seeing like an increase in like in harassment in terms of like telling people, hey, you can go to these charities for money if you can't pay rent, but I'm expecting you to pay the rent.
Are there those people who have not been able to pay their rent, is there intimidation? What happens to them? What's been happening to them?
It's the threat of housing court in the eventual future, basically, and also the threat of not doing repairs, which is, as Juan has stated,
Sure.
like it's always an issue, but I think that even more so now because of people having to stay at home. So if you had like a leaky faucet before, then it's exacerbated by the multiple use that you're having now with the entire family there, or it might get worse just because of the timing. So
I've read that some landlords actually change the locks while the tenants are out, and some have cut off power, utilities, or they let themselves into the tenants' apartments and throw their stuff onto the street. Are you seeing this kind of thing happening in the Bronx as well?
I haven't seen that.
That's from Philly. They're doing bad things in Philly.
There's illegal lockouts still happening. I would say none of the buildings that we're organizing in right now have had illegal lockouts, but that's
Do you believe it's because the tenants are organized?
Yeah, and I think it's also because of the fact that we won, because of tenants working hard to get in a moratorium on evictions recently. Like we, have their, like, one of their main ways of being able to evict people is obviously through court, even though they do it illegally as well. So like now landlords are reverting to like the old ways.
Well, housing court is closed, so they can't get anyone out, really.
Yeah, they can't get anyone out, and they can't file any cases against them either, which is good in terms of them starting a new case. But still, they have always found clever ways to harass people.
Are tenants willing to come together and stand as a block and say, if my neighbor cannot pay the rent due to, say, her having COVID herself, not having a job at this point, we're all not going to pay as a group?
Well, yeah, if you have a strong tenant association that has strong support, then yeah, you can organize that and say, well, if my neighbor from the third floor isn't going to pay, then in solidarity, I'm not going to pay with you. But a lot of people aren't going to be able to pay by default, right? So it's just a lot of
Don't tell them that.
Yeah.
Say we're withholding for solidarity. Yeah.
We have elderly tenants that they can't go to the check cashing place to get a money order, either way, to get the rent and then go and walk to the mailbox to send the rent out. So there's cases where tenants can't even physically go and pay for the rent because they're not able to, because they're older and they can't leave their apartment. So there's certain cases like that where by default they just can't physically pay. And then there are a lot of cases like my other neighbors that aren't able to work, where they literally just can't pay. They don't have the money right now. So as a tenant association, we are getting together right now, trying to decide how we're going to move forward in my building. And part of that is standing in solidarity and withholding our rent. But also because in our building specifically, our landlord has been trying to hit us with these random fees, these random increases on our rents. And that's pushing us even more into wanting to go and possibly do like a rent strike, right? Because even on top of the pandemic, he's still trying to do these little sneaky things and sneak these random charges on people's rents, knowing that even right now, this is not the time for you to start doing that.
Tenants are supposed to be entitled to certain protections because of the coronavirus. What are these protections, and are they working at all?
Well, it depends. There are rights that all renters have here in New York City. But if your rent stabilized, so if you live in a building that has 6 apartments or more, and that's been, it's like an older apartment, probably like at least 30 or 40 years old, then you have more rights than other people. But generally the things that have changed, aside from like the type of renter you are really around the moratorium on evictions. And so in terms of housing court, and in terms of like the landlord being able to file something against you in housing court, and also in case you are experiencing like repair issues, and like, let's say there's an emergency repair that needs to get done, like the ceiling is like coming through, there's like a giant leak, for example, like those are things that you can still go to housing court for. You can still go to housing court for the legal lockout, for example, if they, right, they change the locks, if they lock, like who knows, if they did whatever they did to keep you out. And what was the third one? I think that's it. There's probably one more that I'm like missing off the cuff, but
That's okay. You'll come
yeah,
up with it.
but there are still, so you have new rights now, given that COVID-19 is happening. And there is talk about a suspension of rent and utilities and mortgage, or for homeowners here in New York State. So hopefully,
when are we going to get that? I want that just
I
personally.
I
I want to start paying the rent too.
Is our main target. He has the power to get it done, and so we're hoping that by May 1st, we can push him to like decide that yes, there will be a cancellation, because we know that there was a lot of people, like Juan said, that who couldn't pay rent in April, and in May, there's going to be much more, because a lot of people were laid off in the middle of, or the end of March.
So let me think this through a little bit. So if Cuomo could say, we're going to insist that in our state, banks do not collect mortgage payments or rent payments for the month of May. It's just going to be,
it would be just during the duration of COVID. So we're asking for the duration of COVID. Yeah.
Even better.
Yeah, because we know that like even in a couple of months is not going to help, especially when if the courts are reopened in June, which hopefully they're not, because there are representatives asking for it to be extended 6 months past. But if not, people are just going to look at a big old bill of debt, right?
Have you had any indication from Governor Cuomo or his office that he is considering what the tenants associations are asking?
Juan, do you want to share what he's?
What did Cuomo say, Juan?
Yeah, not at all, actually. He's kind of holding on to this whole thing about, well, I did the eviction moratorium. What else should I do? I mean, that's enough for people. But he doesn't understand that once that it's over, you're gonna see tenants being thrown into housing court. You're gonna have landlords asking for the 3 months that they didn't pay to pay them at that time, especially at a time where people aren't gonna be working. So he's been pretty just saying like, I did the eviction moratorium, like kind of wiping his hands, like I'm done. That's enough. I don't hands down. Well, he knows clearly that it's not, that he has the power to cancel the rent, and it's super necessary right now. It's a way to help people feel
this
more.
This would be an amazing if he does that. I mean, I don't necessarily see that happening, but if he does that, that would be the kind of move that would really indicate that this country is changing, and it's really changing fundamentally. Telling the banks you can't collect a mortgage is pretty significant.
But
it doesn't mean, if your mortgage is, if the I mean, do they even have a mortgage? He probably pays taxes on the land, but I'm assuming the building's probably paid off at this point.
No, not even. What we see, especially with these large portfolio landlords like Juan, Stephen Finkelstein, is that they'll get new mortgages out, usually at a time when they're like gonna do like construction or just to move money around. So they do that often. New York Community Bank is one of the banks that do the most business with these shady landlords.
Oh boy. Well, what can people do who want to support tenants who are vulnerable to these vulture landlords? What can we do to help? What can people do to help?
There's a couple of things. One, we have the rent strike toolkit that we came out with, I think maybe like 2 weeks ago. It's on the, if you type in, actually, if you like put in the search box, like rent strike toolkit, it'll look up, you'll find it.
I'm going to get
the link. Also found on the Right to Counsel Coalition website. So if you also go to that website and go to resources on that like homepage, you'll see the rent strike toolkit. We're basically giving resources to people who can't pay rent either by default, right? Or because something else is pressing. And so that's number one. Juan, do you want to tell them what else they can do?
Well, we also have the Housing Justice for All, which is the statewide campaign. And it's a bunch of coalitions from the city and from the state that are working for. Right now, the campaign is based around canceling and suspending rents and mortgages. We have a petition floating around that you can sign up.
I want that.
That's a huge petition. I think we have over 90,000 signatures at this point.
I just put it in our Twitch, and maybe we can get it into our Facebook stream as well. But I put in right to council, nyc.org. You can also look up Housing Justice for All. Juan and Nova, can you talk about, has there been any interstate cooperation? Because I'm assuming that it's not just New York City landlords that are, that are being horrendous, and that there are tenants associations across the country that are fighting the same fight. Have you seen any sort of coalition of the tenant organizations? And if not, let's do that. Let's get that.
No, there's definitely a national, it's called People's Action, which is a bunch of coalitions and organizations from across the US. And we have weekly calls, field calls that we do with tenants all over the country. Last week, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, she introduced a bill on a federal level that would cancel and suspend rent mortgages. Is a very good bill. We're trying right now to gather as much support for it nationwide. But this People's Action it's a great movement right now. We have a lot of different coalitions, and we get on the calls and we give each other advice, and we just, it's like a nationwide support, and we're all fighting for housing. We believe that housing is a human right. And it's a
yes.
work, and
I just had a lawyer on to talk about this as well. This is such an important conversation that needs to be had, just to go against all of the insane talk about private property that we live in with.
But it's important to know that we've made the fact that right now New York City is eviction free is something that we never would have thought of like last year. We were actually considered fighting for a moratorium on evictions during the winter. And the fact that we were even able to get this right now shows that there's a lot of possibility in this moment of crisis. And it's a good opportunity to also push for really radical, ideas, or we would say radical, that
they're just generally good ideas for the people.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, this has been great.
Profit.
Yes, Pete, thank you so much. So let me give the Twitter handles that people can follow. I'm going to put them in the Twitch account, and also I will put them via my voice onto anywhere you are watching this interview. You can follow at Northwest Bronx. That's the coalition that you guys are working with. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you can follow Juan at, this is all on Twitter, Juan ESTPABS,
yeah.
and Nova at Novalicious. Beautiful. That's a great Twitter handle. Beautiful, beautiful.
I was like 18 or something.
No, then you're stuck with it forever. Nova, Juan, thanks for joining us. Final words to people who are watching.
Well, for me, I mean, if anybody's watching, if you're a tenant out there in New York City and New York State, please talk to your neighbors. Get them to come together, support each other. When you do your wellness checks with people, when you're calling to see how they're doing, ask them if they're able to pay their rent. Tell them to be honest with you. And just get as many people together, because everybody's going through the same thing. You'll be surprised once you talk to your neighbors how you're all kind of suffering through the same struggles right now. And if you all get together, you can really get some things going, get some protections going for your tenants, for your neighbors, and join the movement, because this is the time now,
Thank you so much. Thank you. Nova, last words?
I want to encourage everybody to participate if they can in the rent strike, or in supporting the rent strikes that people across the country are doing for May 1st, for May Day, as a day to celebrate struggle, and also to take part, like Juan said, in something that is going to be much bigger than ourselves. So look out for whatever is your neighborhood organization doing for May 1st. I know for us in the Bronx, we're going to be planning a lot of things online and maybe an in-person demonstration. So please stay tuned.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nova. Thank you, Juan. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Bye.